Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. Welcome to the first edition of Context, a new show on the BBC News Channel and BBC World News. On tonight's programme, Novak Djokovic says he still wants to compete in the Australian Open after a judge frees him from detention. The 34-year-old said he practised on court in Melbourne within hours of leaving his detention hotel. His family is delighted by the news.
This is a huge win for Novak and for his family and the whole free world.
A newly leaked email shows a top aide to Boris Johnson invited Number 10 staff to a lockdown party at a time when social mixing was banned. And at high-level talks with the United States in Geneva, Russian officials say they have no intention of invading Ukraine. Tonight, with the context, our panellists Sonia Khan, former special advisor to Sajid Javid when he was Conservative Chancellor, and Amanda Renteria, top aide to Hillary Clinton in her 2016 presidential campaign. Hello, a new year, a new show. Welcome to the first edition of Context. At this hour each day, we'll be bringing you the best analysis on all the top stories with our panel of experts. They'll stay with us for the next hour to give us their insights and context on what's happening around the world. And we're going to start with Novak Djokovic, who has been released from an immigration detention facility in Melbourne. He was taken out of that hotel in this white people carrier, fans cheering his release after an Australian judge overturned the government's earlier decision to cancel his visa. But that is not the end of it. In the next few hours, the immigration minister will rule whether to deport Djokovic on the grounds he's not fully vaccinated. The world number one was soon practising on court last night and tweeting, seemingly determined, despite all the controversy, to compete in next week's Australian Open. At home in Belgrade, Novak Djokovic's family have been reacting to news of his release. His father said it was a bigger win than any of his Grand Slam victories.
The game that has been played over the past 5 or 6 days has been really incredibly difficult for him and his family. And he was not given any rights. He had no rights. They took away all his rights. His rights that he has as a human being.
Let's head out then to Sydney and we can speak to Tracy Holmes, who is a sports reporter for Australia's ABC News. Tracy, good to have you with us. So a decision is expected this morning. Any clues as to what might happen, and can the decision be appealed?
The decision can be appealed, to answer that question, but it's a much higher bar that would have to be passed, because this comes down to the minister's responsibility and ability to be able to make a decision in the interest of the public of Australia and whether Novak Djokovic is a threat. And this comes down to, the combination of biosecurity laws here, the COVID regulations, all of the things that people have been talking about in the past week or so. But it does come down to that individual decision that the minister has the authority to make. Now, he is going to want to make sure that his case is particularly watertight, having had the embarrassment of losing the case in the Federal Circuit Court yesterday, thinking that we were going to emerge from the other side, and now we've got more case numbers than any other time in the COVID pandemic. So there's frustration. There was oodles of coverage that basically suggested that here was somebody who was rorting the system, coming in and flouting our rules and regulations, when in fact what was revealed in court yesterday showed that that wasn't the case. The case was that everything that was put to Novak Djokovic, he succeeded in achieving. Every barrier, every new medical exemption, every border force requirement to get a QR code before he could even get on the plane. So the interest in all of this is that there seems to be a miscommunication in the messaging between everybody. So from Tennis Australia, the Victorian government, the federal government, nobody really sure what the end game is, who has the right, who gets to determine who comes in. Obviously, borders are for the federal government, but when it comes to travelling and arrivals and COVID vaccinations or exemptions, that is a state-based issue. And so this is where the cock-up occurred. I don't think anybody has gone about this and try to intentionally bring about a cock-up. I think everybody was doing their absolute utmost, but the dots just did not connect. And the person that was caught in the middle was Novak Djokovic.
Tracy Holmes, thank you very much indeed for that. Amanda, I've been looking at the State Department's travel guides just to compare how it looks vis-a-vis Australia's travel guidance. And actually, when you put up what the State Department has advised people, you can't travel to the United States unless you are fully vaccinated, and there are very limited exemptions. Children under 18, those who are medically unable to receive the vaccine, and emergency travellers who don't have timely access to a vaccine. So under those rules, Amanda, I can't see that Novak Djokovic would be allowed into the United States, would he?
That's right. They're pretty clear. It makes it much easier internally to be able to manage that when that comes to the borders. So, yeah, there wouldn't be much change here, although I will say you mentioned politics, and everything always has an ability to move when you're close to an election. So as far as where the laws are right now, certainly wouldn't be able to come into the United States, but politics always adds an interesting curve to things.
Absolutely it does. And when you look at the polling in Australia, Scott Morrison, obviously, you would think his instinct would be to take a tougher line. But as Tracy was just saying, Sonia, you look at the implications, the legal implications here. There is appearance money, there's sponsorship money, there's reputational damage that there could be to Novak Djokovic. So the government doesn't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for them, the Australian government has always taken a very hardline approach to tackling COVID-19. And I think it's right that they ensure that no one gets special treatment, whether through issues with a visa or medical exemptions or otherwise. I think from their perspective, there were a lot of Australians who couldn't see or bury their loved ones during the height of the pandemic. So I imagine it's really, really hard to justify why a celebrity should be treated differently.
There is one other issue here as well. He told the Australian Border Force he tested positive for COVID on the 16th of December. And then reportedly, he's seen on Twitter in a photograph hugging children on the 17th. So he will be forced to ask questions for that. I suppose the one takeaway from Australia is that patience is running out for those who break the COVID rules, which takes us neatly, or perhaps not so neatly, if you're sitting in number 10, to matters here in the UK. There is another development in the long-running saga surrounding the Downing Street parties during lockdown last year. Tonight, ITV have published an email from the Prime Minister's principal private secretary inviting Number 10 staff to a drinks party on May 20th, 2020. In the email, Martin Reynolds writes, "It would be nice to make the most of the lovely weather and have some socially distanced drinks in the Number 10 garden this evening. Please join us from 6 p.m. and bring your own booze." 40 people joined that party, and this was at the time of the first lockdown. Less than an hour before that party began, the then Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden was instructing the country that they should be following the rules and only meeting with one other person outdoors. Sonia, the government's defence the first time when these pictures emerged of a garden party on the 15th of May was that it was a working meeting. The email that we see here from Martin Reynolds makes it very clear it's a social gathering, it's a drinks party. How does Number 10 defend that?
I don't think it really can, and I think it knows that, and it's going out of its way to try and manage it. And it was really interesting over the weekend because we saw Number 10 trying to get ahead of the stories by placing the blame on the senior private secretary to the Prime Minister, Martin Reynolds. And that's kind of a process that we've seen before. Allegra Stratton got fired when actually the principal issue isn't about the aides around the Prime Minister. It's why there is so much rule breaking happening at Number 10 and what are the consequences going to be, which is where most people are interested. So the idea of an internal inquiry is great being conducted by Seagrave, but what impact will that have? I think they're on to story number 13. The BBC did a great sort of calculator combining all of them. But I think that's where people will really struggle, and to see what the impact is from this. You know, will it stop people from listening to any further lockdown rules if they're introduced? I don't know.
You have your own issues, of course, as a former special advisor carrying the can for something. We won't dig into that too deeply. But I wonder, having had that experience of being in the midst of it all, whether you see a culture problem at Number 10.
I mean, I think It's a difficult one to answer because I think there have been issues with every single prime minister. But what I find really hard is that nobody was able to stop and say, this isn't right. Certainly it's not normal. I've never known it to be normal to have a work party where you can bring your own beer or bring your own booze even. So I would question, there are lots of senior, very well-educated, very intelligent people who knew the rules, but either turned a blind eye or found that they were too busy with other things to address it.
Does it irritate you? I've got to ask you this. Does it irritate you, given your history with Dominic Cummings, that it is him that has pointed the investigator, the senior civil servant Sue Gray, towards this email?
No, I think what the greater irritation for me and lots of other people is that we want to see answers from the government, but we're not getting them. So often the scrutiny is coming from the press, which is great because that's their role. But we've not had any answers other than constantly referring to an inquiry. So where is the end point for this?
Yeah, I suppose it's a very British story, this, Amanda, but I suppose the thing to say is that there is always an email. You have to be very careful when you're communicating with the press if there are emails that are still to be released.
That's right. There's always an email. There's social tracking now. I think any elected official, it is a new world, and anything you are putting in writing, anything you are putting in text, you have to imagine it is discoverable. Yeah,
that's why managing the message is so important, why so many backbenchers, of course, have been asking questions about the Number 10 operation. This is Context on the BBC, still to come. Investigators are piecing together just how 17 people came to die in New York's worst apartment fire in decades. We'll be live in the Bronx next. Let's take a quick look at some of the other stories making headlines here today. An independent inquiry will investigate how a serving police officer, Wayne Couzens, was able to abduct, rape and murder Sarah Everard last March. The first phase will look at his conduct during his career. It will also investigate whether any red flags were missed concerning him and his behaviour. 8 men who were abused by the convicted paedophile Barry Bennell more than 30 years ago have lost their High Court case against the Manchester City Football Club. The men, now in their 40s and 50s, said Bennell was a scout for Manchester City at the time. A judge ruled the club was not liable, but praised the men's bravery in coming forward. And Buckingham Palace has revealed how the Queen's Platinum Jubilee will be marked this year. The celebrations began today with the launch of a competition to invent a new pudding to commemorate the Queen's, the Queen's 70-year reign. There will be street parties and a concert featuring some of the world's best-known entertainers. Russian and American diplomats have just finished a crunch day in talks in Geneva, and with 100,000 Russian troops massed on the border with Ukraine, the stakes could hardly be higher. President Putin wants NATO to pull its forces out of former Soviet countries and to rule out Ukraine ever joining the NATO alliance. America says the Russian president is setting unrealistic expectations, effectively a dismantling of Europe's post-Cold War security. After today's talks, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said the situation could turn dangerous if the two sides can't agree on what to do next.
If now NATO proceeds towards deployment of capabilities that are being developed very rapidly in the US and will possibly be introduced somewhere in Europe, it would require a military response on the Russian part.
Well, let's bring into our discussion Kurt Volker, who served as US Special Representative for the Ukraine negotiations under President Trump. Kurt, it's good to have you on the programme again. Thanks for sparing us some time. I was just saying that the demands that were made by Russia looked unrealistic. Some said they were the pretext for invasion once they were inevitably rejected. But tonight, the Russians are saying they have no intention of invading Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, the Russians are saying a lot of things. They did say, yes, we have no plans to invade. They didn't say they had no intention. They had no plans. But they also said that the security of the West and of NATO would be threatened if there is no flexibility on NATO's side, if there's no agreement. So the Russians are still threatening. And what they are threatening is violence or aggression if they do not get the West to agree to rewrite the rules of security in Europe, as the White House said. It's exactly what they're looking for. They want to have a dominance over Ukraine, a sphere of influence. They want to say that countries don't have a right to choose their own alliances. They want to have a say over the internal affairs of other countries. And they have already changed borders by. I view this as President Putin reestablishing a Russian empire, that he is taking parts of Ukraine, taking parts of Georgia. We now have Russian forces controlling security services in Belarus and in Kazakhstan now. And he's doing it with a willingness to use military force and challenging the West to do anything about it, which he knows the West is not going to do militarily. So he is just putting it out there, stating his case, and then making it happen.
Well, that last point you made is the important one, isn't it? The United States and the Secretary of State are saying the response will be massive sanctions. But that's the extent of US involvement in Europe now. We've had 2 successive presidents and now a third who are loath to get involved in foreign wars. And I don't want to sound like a warmonger, far from it. but sanctions don't cut it. And you wonder whether this is the inevitable outcome of the US attitude to the rest of the world.
Yes, well, I think added to your list is Putin having observed the disastrous U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and concluding that the United States at the moment does not have the stomach for any kind of military pushback. What we should be doing is putting force on the table now, support for Ukraine, support for our Eastern allies, so that Russia sees that, and make clear we have a willingness to use that force if we are forced to do so, but that we do not want to do so, and that we are also prepared to back down again if Russia stands down its forces. What we've done instead is say we will only respond, and we will only respond with sanctions, which I do not believe is enough to deter Putin.
Now, come in on that, Amanda, would you, for me? Because there was no response to the takeover in Crimea. There's been no response to his aggression in Georgia. So why wouldn't President Putin push the boundary?
Well, I think you do have an experienced team now under Biden to really take this on. I do think they are being very careful. Given everything that happened in Afghanistan, you are seeing Secretary Blinken on all the different shows communicating that there's a lack of trust here, communicating with the American people that we are concerned, communicating with the American people that we're not sure where Russia is going to go, but really setting the stage to have a better communication path than Afghanistan. And I think you've got a very experienced team that I think will begin to look at these lines. Now, having said all of that, you are right. The model is sanctions, and there's still a belief that there is a way to go with massive sanctions. I don't see Biden changing that strategy. I think he will go forward with massive sanctions, but I think there will be a better communication strategy with the American people and globally as well.
Trust is a big thing, Kurt Volk. I mean, the Europeans might ask, post-Afghanistan, why there should be any trust in the Americans negotiating on their behalf. They're not sitting at the table here.
Right, and we've heard that directly. We've heard that, and not only from the Ukrainians, who are the most concerned here about being left out, but also from the European Union, also from France. France and Germany sent their envoys to Moscow so they could have direct talks with Russia in advance of this. So there is a little bit of bristliness within our European allies as well. That being said, that's exactly what Putin wants. Putin designed the nature of these discussions this week, bilateral U.S., then NATO, Russia, then OSCE, deliberately leaving out the Ukrainians and deliberately leaving out the EU, because he is trying to sow these divisions within the West, and we can't allow him to do that. We do have to stick together.
I suppose trust goes 2 ways, Sonia. The Europeans have given the Americans guarantees on sanctions, but of course the Germans and the Italians have not been particularly trustworthy when it comes to imposing sanctions on Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons why it doesn't feel like Europe really has a seat at the table. There are obviously big divisions between Western and Eastern Europe. I think even on the Eastern European side, Hungary and Poland have very different views, which makes kind of coalescing around one policy difficult. And I think, as it's pointed out, really for the center of gravity to change in Europe, you would need Germany to act. But naturally, the Nord Stream pipeline is one reason perhaps why they won't do that. I think on the European side, we also have a lot less to give, I would argue, even if there are sanctions. I think Russia is much more fearful about perhaps losing things like operations, like banking operations in the US, than perhaps what the geopolitical impact is of leaving Europe.
Yeah. That is a good point. 2 further meetings coming this week, one at NATO on Wednesday and then one at the OSCE on Thursday. We'll see how they go. Kurt Volker, lovely to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to turn briefly to the case in New York. Officials investigating whether a maintenance issue with an apartment door may have allowed smoke to spread through a high-rise building in the Bronx. 17 people were killed yesterday, including 9 children, after a heater in a third-floor apartment malfunctioned on Sunday. It appears that all those deaths were caused by smoke inhalation rather than burns. Neda Tawfik is in New York for us. Neda, what do we now know about the cause of the fire? What are the concerns for residents?
Yeah, well, Christian, officials talking today about 2 key failures that led to this tragedy. First, a portable space heater that, even though the building had heating at the time, the family was using, and that sparked the fire. And officials saying that they want to look closer into that. And secondly, Christian, 2 doors were supposed to automatically shut in this building, and those malfunctioned at the time. The door to the unit here on the 2nd and 3rd floor where that blaze raged, and then another doorway in one of the hallways on the 12th floor. So allowing that smoke, as you said there, to spread very quickly up the building and to cause real concerns for residents. So it seems that those are one of the 2 key failures that we had here, Christian.
There are obvious echoes here with the tragedy at Grenfell here in London, and we're having a very active discussion today even in Parliament about fire safety and the onus that should be put on building owners, on freeholders. So what does the city authorities there plan to do to stop this happening again?
Yeah, Christian, that's really at the forefront of discussions today, too. Congressman Richie Torres, who represents this area, says he wants a task force made up of local, state and federal authorities to try to get to the bottom of what new laws and procedures need to be put in place. So, for instance, those portable heaters, we know they're responsible for many other fires as well in the past. So looking again at that safety. And then I think one of the key issues is building maintenance and safety. And what happened here. So, for example, the owner and officials, including New York's mayor, said that the smoke alarms were working, but many residents complained about the fact that they went off too frequently, and so they became accustomed to ignoring those warnings from those smoke detectors. They also talk about how these doors, again, this automatic lock that failed. Well, that is a provision that is in place in all of the city, but one provision that isn't is to have sprinklers in residential buildings. So commercial buildings all have sprinklers in them, but residential buildings don't, like this one. And so there has been a push in New York and the city council in the past to do that, but it is expensive. And landlords have complained about how much that would cost to upgrade. So there's new discussions about whether that needs to be pushed through. And then also, Christian, there's no fire escapes on this building. Updated buildings now have internal stairwells, but we can see these older buildings, what happens when residents are faced with that smoke and fire. Many had to wait to be rescued from their windows here and were trapped inside.
Yeah, striking similarities with the debate we're having here in the UK. Neda Tawfik, thank you very much for that. First big test then for the New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Coming up on our programme, is Europe about to go the way of the United States and cut self-isolation to 5 days? We'll be speaking to President Biden's former top COVID advisor, Andy Slavitt, about the science and the criticism that's been aimed at the White House over its COVID messaging. Back in a few moments.
Hello there. Many parts of the UK will see some sunshine tomorrow. Today, though, it's been a cloudy start to the week for all of us. The cloud's been coming in from the Atlantic and it's been thick enough to bring with it some pockets of rain and drizzle. And the main weather fronts driving that cloud and rain southwards this evening and overnight. Clearer skies following into Scotland and Northern Ireland, but we keep that cloudy, mild air across England and Wales. Some low cloud, some further outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Certainly a mild night for England and Wales, much milder than last night for eastern England, no frost this time. But where we have the clearer skies in Northern Ireland and Scotland, particularly in eastern Scotland, we could start Tuesday with some frost and some sunshine as well. But we have this cloud and rain and drizzle moving south across England and Wales. Coming to rest across East Anglia and southern England, we should see some late improvements across South Wales and the Midlands, with more sunshine further north. A few blustery showers coming into the northwest of Scotland. It's going to be a bit cooler than today for Glasgow and for Belfast. The highest temperatures will be where we've got that cloudy, damp weather in southern England. That's on that weak weather front there. That moves away overnight, and then high pressure comes to build across the southern half of the UK. Further north, things look a little different through the rest of the week. There'll be a stronger wind from the Atlantic, but that will bring mild air, and it's across northern areas that we'll see the highest temperatures. Further south, it's going to be colder, the winds will be lighter, and there'll be more mist, fog and low cloud developing through the week as well. Could well start with some frost across England and Wales on Wednesday and a few patches of mist and fog. Those will lift and many places dry with some sunshine. A bit more cloud into the northwest on that stronger wind could bring 1 or 2 showers. And it's across northern Scotland that we've got the highest temperatures. Through the Midlands, perhaps only 5 degrees. Contrast really north-south because of the position of the high pressure. Now, around the top of the high pressure, we've got these milder, stronger Atlantic winds. Underneath the high, the air is just stagnating. So we're going to find more mist and fog forming overnight and lingering through Thursday across England and Wales, perhaps lifting into low cloud. Outside of that, some sunshine. More cloud comes in on those stronger winds in the north and west of Scotland, but again, it's generally dry. And we've got those contrasts again, north-south across the UK. Heading towards the end of the week, it looks quite grey for many parts of the country, actually. A bit more of this mist and fog developing once again.
Is the world of opera changing? We had to start more with using technology and using streaming, for instance.
Find out about its growing global appeal from the biggest names in opera today and 2 of the superstars of the future.
Take Me to the Opera with Zainab Badawi. Watch on iPlayer.
Download the BBC News app now and get the latest headlines as they happen. Personalise your app to learn more about the stories you care about and watch BBC News live wherever you are. Stay up to date, whatever you're up to. Download the BBC News app.
Each year has been a record-breaking hot year.
Living with extreme temperatures and changing climates can have a devastating impact.
We are on a bullet train to annihilation.
We meet the people on the front line of climate change.
I know we've caused the problems, and I know we also hold the key to the solutions.
And find out how they plan to survive it.
Let's do it.
Life at 50 degrees. Watch on iPlayer.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching Context on BBC News. With the United States still reporting almost 1 million COVID cases per day, I'll be speaking with Andy Slavitt, who has advised the White House on its approach to the pandemic. Here in the UK, with the cost of living soaring, we're going to ask if the government will fulfil its pledge to cut taxes on home energy bills. If it smells fresh and it looks fresh, then the milk is probably safe to drink. A major supermarket is replacing the use-by dates and asking us to apply the sniff test. Very much not past their sell-by date. Tonight's panellists are back with the context. Sonia Khan, former Downing Street advisor to the UK Treasury, and Amanda Renteria, who was part of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign team. Welcome back. The good news in London is that the worst of the Omicron outbreak appears to be behind us, although the case numbers are still high and the case numbers in the rest of the country are still rising. In the worst case scenario, 25% of the public sector workforce could soon be under lockdown. And so the Prime Minister is considering going the way of the United States and cutting the length of time people need to self-isolate once they've tested positive.
There's a similar argument to be had about the quarantine period, whether to come down from 7 days to 5 days. The thing to do is to look at the science.
So let's just remind ourselves how the isolation rates compare. In the United States, the fully vaccinated only need to isolate for 5 days, so long as they are no longer showing any symptoms. Here in England, you have to isolate for 7 days after a positive test. It's similar in France. But in Scotland, people still have to isolate for 10 days. So what is the science behind it? Let's talk to Andy Slovitt, who was advising the White House on its COVID-19 response last year. Andy, lovely to see you. Thanks for coming back to speak to us. Let's look at the science then. What is the case for 5 days of isolation? And does that start with symptoms or does that start with a positive test?
Well, as you just went through, the state of the science is still being debated. And, you know, that's the nature of this pandemic. We're having to make decisions real time, none of them perfect. I mean, if you think about it this way, if you let 10% of the people out into the public who are still contagious, that's a bad thing, right? But if you keep 90% of people who are not contagious away from their jobs, their family, their work, that's also a bad thing. So you're really doing is all the governments you talked about are trying to figure out how to play the odds the best way possible. And there's some period of time right around the 5th, 6th, 7th day after first getting diagnosed when you are, if you take a negative test and wear a mask, it's very likely safe for you to be out in public. And I think everybody is circling around some version of that.
OK, so obviously you say the science is developing. There are large swathes of the public who are still receptive to public messaging. But you'll be aware today in the American press, there's been some criticism of the CDC. And they think, people who are around the CDC, that they're squandering the message. So this is someone who worked with you. This is Celine Gounder, who worked for the Biden Advisory Board. She says the administration in general has lost the confidence of people who would be their natural supporters. And then you've got Leanna Wen, a physician and professor at George Washington University, saying the CDC is facing a real crisis of trust. I mean, when you look, Andy, at the vaccination rate, fully vaccinated rate, which is stubbornly stuck at 62%, isn't a problem with messaging a real cause for concern?
Well, look, I think people are frustrated, and criticism always, whenever you see cases spike and things are out of control, you see plenty of criticism. And look, there are definitely things the CDC should be criticized for, could do better, take lessons, approach, etc. A lot of what, though, if you get behind some of this, it's why didn't people see Delta coming and plan for it? Why didn't the government see Omicron coming and plan for it? Why wasn't the government able to convince a bunch of younger people, conservatives in rural communities, that they should get vaccinated? Well, you know, the truth is 85% of adults in the U.S. have had at least one shot. And when Biden came into office, only about 40% of adults at the time said they wanted to get vaccinated. So, you know, in 1 year's time, that's quite a bit of progress. It maybe people are frustrated because it's not as fast or as much as people wanted. I understand that people are at a frustrated stage, but all the administration can do is control for the things that they can, boost as many people as possible, produce as many tests.
Of this, when you look at the polling that Joe Biden had on his handling of COVID at the beginning of last year, it was very high. It has now slumped. This issue with messaging, it's starting to have a real effect as we go into a midterm cycle.
That's right, because it's lasted longer than anyone anticipated. And people are tired. I mean, one of the conversations over the holidays was really hearing Dr. Fauci say, we're trying to find a practical path forward, because they know that if they have very restrictive guidelines, it could actually mean more people don't pay attention and do what they want to do and really defy those rules. And so it is a careful balance in People trust Biden. They've trusted it on COVID, and he has to make sure.
Who have not been vaccinated and who are required to self-isolate after contact with a positive COVID case will no longer get their full salary while they're off work. The move means that unvaccinated workers will receive as little as £96.35 a week under statutory sick pay. The average pay, just to compare that, for an IKEA shop worker is around £400 for an average working week. That's outside London. What do you make of that, Sonia? I mean, on the Conservative side, they're defending people's liberty and their people's right not to have the vaccine while encouraging them to do this. But I get the sense that companies facing an absentee challenge are starting to fill the void with their own mandates because the government's not going there.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and that's been a huge challenge right the way through the pandemic. But there's been a lot of kind of guidance out there that allows people to make their own interpretations, which is why we see examples of this. But when I read the story earlier, the thing I really struggled with was understanding what the purpose of this policy is for IKEA and what it's set to achieve. So staff shortages was the biggest reason that it exists, but I feel like there's a strong case for the policy exacerbating them. I don't know if you remember, but right at the start of the pandemic, we had people who wouldn't test or people who would still go into work sick because they couldn't live without pay. And as a result, the virus spread. I think where we are now with a less acute version of a less acute variant even, it's quite hard to distinguish between Omicron and kind of a normal cold. So I'm not sure that this policy is going to achieve what IKEA set it to achieve, and I don't think it's a good example to follow.
There are other companies that are following suit, Amanda. In America, Citibank is giving its staff until Friday to get vaccinated or they're out. It's get a jab, keep your job. This is what they said. You're welcome to apply for other roles at Citi in the future as long as you are compliant with Citi's vaccination policy. If you're not vaccinated, we urge you to get vaccinated as soon as possible. The issue, and this is the point, Amanda, is that here in England, if you are not vaccinated and you come into close contact with someone who has been infected with COVID, then as an unvaccinated person, you have to stay inside much longer than someone who was vaccinated. So that puts extra strain on the company. So do you have some sympathy with companies that are going this way?
I have sympathy, and at the same time, what you're beginning to see is really dynamics play within different industries, right? You did see Delta Airlines take one stance, American Airlines take another stance. You're seeing schools treat vaccinated children in a certain way and unvaccinated in another way. And so you're seeing a lot more organizations really try and figure out, how do you incentivize your staff to get vaccinated and at the same time not push people out? And you will begin to see what companies do that. How does that affect customers? And what does that mean for the business model going longer term? Because people are beginning to recognize debt is building up. And what does the new model look like?
Yeah,
and
there's a real
really
split, actually, isn't there? Because when you look at the Supreme Court case last week, where they're challenging the federal mandates, it's American businesses that are part of the case, because they think that the mandates are going to lead to more labour shortages, whereas there are other companies saying, well, yeah, but if people are out of work because they're not vaccinated and they're staying away longer because they're not vaccinated, we also have a problem with labour shortage.
That's right. And so we're in this space that I think, in the next month, 2 months, you're going to begin to see being on one side of the line or the other, and it will impact industries differently. The airline industry will be very different than the restaurant industry, than education industry. And so we're going to see that play out in real time as spikes are going up.
OK. Well, away from Downing Street parties, the pressure is building on the British Prime Minister to tackle the squeeze on the cost of living, which is pushing many families to crisis point. Inflation right now doesn't look as transitory as some central bankers thought it might be. In the 12 months to October 2021, the cost of food and drink rose by 1.4%. Energy bills increased by 6%, and they're expected to rise a lot more later this year. And the cost to fill up the car rose by more than 10%. To ease the pressure on people's finances, some are calling on the government to freeze taxes that are due to be introduced in the spring and to lower taxes, specifically VAT, on energy bills. Cutting VAT on home energy bills was supposed to be one of the main dividends of Brexit. This is what Mr. Gove said at the time.
The number one area in which we should remove VAT is fuel, because as we know, the very, very poorest households spend up to 10% of their income on heat and power in their houses.
Also in 2016, just so we're sure, Boris Johnson wrote this in the Sun newspaper: "When we vote leave, we will be able to scrap this unfair and damaging tax." But during a press conference just last week, he appeared to reject the idea. I don't understand this, because it is a Brexit dividend. This is the Prime Minister that got Brexit done. So why is he so resistant to cutting VAT on energy, Sonia?
I mean, it's entirely within government's gift. But I think the problem with reducing VAT on energy bills to zero is that it isn't well targeted, and those facing fuel poverty and richer households benefit more. So I think the preferred option for the government is to look at something that's much, much, much more targeted. So they're probably more likely to increase the funds that they've got in existing schemes like the warm home discount and the winter fuel payments. But I would bring some of my Treasury skepticism in here. And I think there's a real nervousness around cutting VAT generally and setting a precedent, because it's applied to so many items. And I think once you remove it off one item, you increase the incentive for others to do it and, you know, give new wind to some old sails. I mean, and then there's the question of how do you fill the black hole if you start to reduce VAT? I think the OBR said in 2019 to 2020, VAT raised £134 billion, which was around £4,700 per household. So if you start with that, how do you plug the hole?
There it is, you see, the policy difference between number 10 and number 11. Would you be in favour of a windfall tax, which the Shadow Chancellor has proposed? So taking money off the oil and gas companies and giving it, like you say, targeting it towards those who need it?
I mean, I'm not sure that it would work in that way. I think that the principal choice that the government has to make is, do you want to do something that helps everyone, or do you want to target the neediest? And political risk comes with either. I think what their preference is probably going to be go for a much more macro view. So potentially use April to raise the minimum wage, the living wage, reduce personal taxes so people have a bit more take-home pay, and then they get a lot more autonomy over their money and get more choice about sort of how they choose to spend it. So I think that would also be a preferred approach for me.
Well, lest we forget this only affects us, there is a rising living cost crisis also playing out in the United States, Amanda. There, the cost of food went up by 6.1% compared with the year before. Utility bills, which include water and electricity, rose by 33%, and the cost of car fuel went up by 58%. And this is having an impact on President Biden's approval ratings. A recent poll by CNBC and Change Research found that 60% of respondents disapprove of Mr. Biden's handling of the economy. And the problem is the money that would have injected some cash into people's pockets, Amanda, the Build Back Better bill, is stuck. It's stuck in the Senate. So how does the government alleviate its problem here in the United States?
That's right. Gas prices are going up, and at the moment, there's no ability to really impact change given where Congress is right now. On the other hand, you know, what I will also say is you have an election coming up. And so guess what people will be talking about, at least in this first quarter, is gas prices, right, in those midterm elections. I'll also just say that this further the divides in America between rural and urban. The conversation happening about gas prices in rural America is very much intense, and you will see districts that are particularly rural, particularly red and Trump supporters, use this as an election tactic, particularly as they're going into their primaries in these first couple of quarters.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? We've just shown that two countries suffering the same thing. You've got the leaders' poll numbers that are suffering as a result. And in some respects, they don't have the power to change it because these are global trends that are impacting on domestic prices. Amanda.
That's right. And you know, not only is there not an ability to impact that globally, but even on the ground, the fact that Congress is stuck, that will be held by Democrats and Biden as they go into this election cycle. And that's why you had the big fight at the end of the year. And you'll continue to see the argument for policies and proposals into the new year on the Senate floor and the House floor for exactly this reason.
Do you see a scenario, Sonia, where they might freeze some of the taxes that they're due to introduce. I think there's 1.5 million people that are going to fall into a higher tax bracket because of rising wages. And of course, there's a rise in national insurance to pay for health and social care. Do you think the Chancellor would be swayed by a freeze until the cost of living crisis has played its way out?
I think it's a difficult one because there are so many competing priorities. Because don't forget, this was meant to be the year of levelling up, and there's a big discussion about how lots of the announcements that we've spoken about today, particularly around kind of leaseholders and cladding, will be paid for. So I think the Chancellor's got quite a tricky decision. I won't just go for tax cuts as the obvious one, because there are also options to raise taxes or, you know, reduce government spending in certain places. So I certainly don't envy him.
No, big decisions to come in the following weeks. This is Context on the BBC, still to come on the programme. Is sniffing your milk a good strategy to reduce food and drink waste? One British supermarket certainly thinks so. We'll be pouring through the changes. One of the UK's greatest ever fossil finds has been revealed. The skeleton of a 10-metre-long sea predator that lived 250 million years ago. It was discovered at Rutland Water Nature Reserve in Leicestershire. Jonah Fisher has more.
Last February, on a bank of mud in a Midlands reservoir, Joe Davis made an extraordinary discovery.
We were re-landscaping some islands on the Rutland Water on the nature reserve there to improve it for bird habitats. And I looked down and just saw this series of ridges in the mud and thought, hang on, that looks different. There's something there that's different. And it had organic features on, almost like where it connects onto the rib. So yeah, that's when we thought we need to call somebody and find out.
Oh, nice. It looks like a bit of snout, yeah.
A team of experts was quickly dispatched. Joe hadn't found a dinosaur, but it was an ichthyosaur, a monstrous air-breathing sea reptile, also known as a sea dragon, that swam about 180 million years ago. Back then, Rutland, and most of the Midlands, was underwater, covered by a warm, shallow sea. What makes this particular sea dragon so special is its size and condition.
This is one of the original bones. This is a backbone, so it's part of the spine, and this is one of more than 150 individual vertebrae in this entire skeleton. So this individual is not only is this the most complete ichthyosaur skeleton ever found, the biggest one ever found here in the UK, incredible at 10 metres long, but it's actually the biggest prehistoric reptile skeleton ever found here as well, the most complete skeleton.
Wow. All right, very gently back.
OK.
The huge ichthyosaur has now been removed from the reservoir bed. The skull block on its own weighed almost a tonne. Having lain in the mud undisturbed for nearly 200 million years, the Rutland sea dragon is one of Britain's greatest ever fossil finds. Jonah Fisher, BBC News.
If you're watching at the beginning of our programme, you'll know that we were talking about Novak Djokovic and the mix-up in messaging between Tennis Australia and the rules that are set down by the federal government. ATP, the Tennis Association, has been speaking in the last few minutes. Just a couple of lines I wanted to bring you. Complications related to tennis player entry on Australia, says the ATP, shows need for clearer application of rules. And the events leading to Mr Djokovic's Monday court hearing, they said, was damaging on all fronts. Certainly it is Tennis Australia that at the moment appears to be carrying the can and the blame for what has unfolded. We'll keep watching that. Now, the British supermarket Morrisons is scrapping the use-by dates it puts on its milk. Instead, you'll see a best before label on 90% of its own brand milk. Milk is the third most wasted food and drink product in the UK after potatoes and bread. The supermarkets say generations before us would give it the old sniff test, and we should too. And if it smells right, it probably is all right. I'm slightly loath, I have to say, Amanda, to put my nose in the fridge because my wife goes by the use it unless it walks rule. So sometimes I open the fridge and the vegetables are doing the lambada on the bottom shelf. I mean, literally, I think she's convinced herself that we're all far too sanitised and any bacteria, any mould at all is good for you. So nothing gets chucked away. But I'm completely the reverse. I'm the one that goes in there and starts chucking things out. What do you do in your house?
We do have two separate sides of the refrigerator as well. The green bananas are on my side and the brown bananas are on my husband's side. And the kids very well know when you're in mom's land or dad's land.
Yeah, brown
because we totally, this is a partnership, right? You figure these things out.
Yeah, brown bananas. I'm with you on that. They go over my wife's side of the room. But what about the rules in America? What do you have on your packaging over there? Best Buy. But you are beginning to see different changes that organic companies are putting on there saying, purchase by when you go to farmers market, you'll see different signs that when they came into the crop, or they won't quite say, it'll be sell by or best in recipes by. It's becoming a little bit more creative, particularly in farmers market, but still at the grocery store, it's sell by. I mean, we're joking. There are millions of tons of food that are thrown into landfill every year. And of course, they produce methane. And methane is far worse for our environment than carbon dioxide. So there is a serious point to it. And we should be doing better with our food. Now, you're probably thinking, I hope you're thinking, after 50 minutes of watching us, how did they make that first programme look so slick? Well, sometimes, let me assure you, it does go wrong, as this next clip will attest. Here is my dear colleague, Laura Trevelyan, out recording a trail for our January 6th riots coverage when this happened.
All right, you ready?
Yeah, when you're ready.
Okay. It's 1 year since the January 6th attack on the US Capitol, when supporters of Donald Trump stormed this building, trying to prevent the election victory of Joe Biden from being certified. On the anniversary, oh my God! Oh God, Sam! Oh!
Oh, poor old Sam, our producer. For world viewers, World News America's coming right up, and Laura is here. Poor Laura. Poor Laura. You could make a profit from that, You should copyright it.
Well, do you know what, Christian? How do you turn a silly viral moment into something meaningful? I've been thinking about this when everyone from your mother-in-law to your kids says you're on TikTok. What do you do? I think the BBC should turn it into a non-fungible token, one of those digital works of art, and sell it to raise money for children in need. Because, Christian, kids have had an abysmal pandemic, and I would love it if me turning into an icicle could do something good for the children in Britain.
Well, I'm very pleased to see you're snug and warm in the studio this evening.
Bit of fibre.
Yes.
Come on, Christian.
A bit of fibre. Cut me in on the profits. I'm on commission. Our thanks to Amanda and Sonia, who've been with us tonight. I hope you'll get to know much more of them when they return in the coming days and weeks. Our panellists tomorrow will be the former Labour MP Ruth Smeeth and Ron Christie, senior advisor to Republican President George W. Bush. For viewers here in the UK, the BBC News at 10 is up next. And for those watching around the world, Laura will be safe and sound in the studio. And just remember, if you do want to get in touch with us and comment on our first programme here on Context, I am finally back on Twitter. It is at Fraser BBC. I'm not convinced by the wisdom of it, but I am there, and I've been convinced that it's a good thing. So get in contact. We'll see you tomorrow.